All right, we're at 7 o'clock on the dot. I think we should just go ahead and get started with this first session of the last day of the ICTD conference 2020. Originally, we were all going to be meeting in Ecuador, and now we're all meeting in cyberspace. I am very pleased to be hosting this session as the session manager, basically, for this morning. We have 3 great papers on gender and specifically about women. And we're going to start off with Dr. Maryam Mustafa from Lahore University of Management Sciences. She wanted me to communicate a warning about the content in this paper. The subject matter is about women seeking safe spaces to talk about things like sexual violence. And so this is a content warning. If those subject matter is particularly disturbing for you and you need to kind of excuse yourself from the session, you should feel free. Each of the presentations will be about 18 minutes. So if you want to come back afterwards, that's fine. So this is just an initial content warning, so you all have a heads up about the subject matter. So I am going to turn this over to you, Dr. Mustafa. Her talk is titled Patriarchy and Social Media, Women-Only Facebook Groups as Safe Spaces for Support Seeking in Pakistan. And then finally, I think we actually do have a little time after each talk for a question or two, but I intend to hold most of the questions for the end of the session. And Maryam, I'm going to have an alarm here when you have a minute left to your talk. I'll give you a little bit of a ringtone alarm so you know. And I appreciate everyone keeping to time if you can possibly manage to do that. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to share presentation. Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, okay, fantastic. So I'm actually going to try and keep this to 15 minutes. I know my original recorded presentation was 18 minutes, but I would like to leave enough space for 1 or 2 questions, as Jenna said. So I'm gonna try very hard to keep this brief. This work looks at peer support mechanisms in patriarchal contexts where women's movements, social relations, and the seeking of support are restricted. We're particularly focusing on closed Facebook groups as safe spaces for taboo narratives like abortion, sexual harassment, rape, and domestic abuse in a context like Pakistan. This work was done by my student Fouzia Younas, who couldn't be here to present, in collaboration with Mustafa Naseem at the University of Michigan. So before I talk a little bit about our work, I would like to take a minute or two and talk about the context in which this study took place. Pakistan, along with Syria, places second to last in the Gender Gap Index, and it ranks out of 149 countries, it ranks at 148. It's a deeply conservative and patriarchal context with few safe spaces for women to share traumatic experiences around abuse, rape, assault, and harassment. And within this context, typically when women get married, they move from their parents' house to their in-laws' home, which more often than not are joint family structures. And this further isolates them from long-established support structures and safe spaces. Now, previous studies have shown that within a Pakistani context, some of the strongest risk factors for depression for women are physical, sexual, and verbal assault, very early marriages, hostile in-laws, and a lack of intimate and confiding relationships with partners. Now, given that sex, harassment, and abuse are taboo topics in Pakistan, women often refrain from reporting their experiences with rape, and marital abuse is considered to be a family matter. It's considered to be a private matter, which is rarely discussed for fear of social judgment, stigma, and isolation. Now, in this context, what we were interested in doing was looking at how technologies are being leveraged to create safe spaces for women to have these conversations. We've particularly focused on Facebook and how Facebook closed groups are leveraged to find connections, anonymous support, and the sharing of deeply personal and traumatic experiences in a very, very complicated context. There's a lot of work that looks at patriarchy and abuse, and there's been an emphasis on the understanding of how control over women is exerted, which includes acid attacks, forced marriages, sexual assault, and rape. Along with this, there's also been a great deal of work in the last couple of years that's looking at, within the HCI community, that looks at access and engagement of women in the South with technologies. We're going a little bit beyond than just access to better understand their expression of agency and autonomy with respect to online digital spaces for self-expression, self-disclosures, and support seeking. Now, in terms of self-disclosures and support seeking, there's been a great deal of work on the use of Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for the self-disclosures of sexual abuse or mental health concerns. But there's been relatively little work that looks at the mechanisms of online safe spaces in patriarchal contexts, where there are very few offline alternatives for the sharing of these experiences. What we've done is that we spent 6 months as part of a closed women-only Facebook group that had over 15,000 members. Two of the authors, the female authors, were part of this group for 6 months. They disclosed themselves to the moderators. They disclosed themselves to the member of the group. And we observed how the group ran. We also tagged 1,700 posts from that 6-month period. We've also conducted a semi-structured interview with there are 2 moderators to the group, and we were able to have a conversation with one of the moderators around how the group functioned and how it was moderated. So the closed Facebook groups actually do not allow the posting of anonymous content directly. So how this functions within this particular group is that the post is made to the group, but it is labeled with #anonymous. The moderators then determine whether the post should be anonymous or not. So what the moderator told us was that being able to post anonymously in this space is a privilege, and they didn't want it to be abused. So there's a clear decision made at this point whether this post should be anonymous or not. So for example, if you were asking for a recommendation for good schools for your child, that's something that would be turned down as an anonymous post. Once the moderators have determined if the post should be anonymous, they sort of go through that post and they scrape it of any identifying information. And then they post it from their own accounts and they tag it as anonymous. Non-anonymous posts get directly sent to the group and they're approved by the moderator, and then they appear on the group. So among non-anonymous posts, most of the posts are looking for recommendations. So where to buy furniture, where to buy clothes, who's a good doctor, where to go for skin issues, or seeking advice. Within the non-anonymous posts, there were very few posts that actually dealt with sexual harassment or domestic violence. But in contrast, the anonymous posts a large percentage of that dealt with anxiety, depression, sexual abuse, abortion, contraceptives, and intimate health. So those were, most of that content was posted as anonymous. Now, the highest percentage of anonymous posts revolved around sexual abuse. And these posts relived old traumas of being abused as a child, or were narratives of abuse in marriages. And these posts sought and elicited emotional support and a recognition of the trauma and injustice that had been experienced. And this recognition of the fact that it was an injustice, that this is a trauma that needs to be worked through, is not something that these women have access to offline. The most frequent expressed emotion in anonymous posts was depression and loneliness. The main subcategories of posts under sexual abuse were regarding sexual harassment and intimate partner violence. Now, these posts were almost always pre-tagged with either a trigger warning or sexual abuse hashtag. A lot of the times this was done by the moderators to ensure that members of the group for whom this would be triggering content could choose to ignore this. For example, one of the anonymous posts that was made under sexual abuse was a very violent account of extreme physical violence. At the time, the poster was 6 months pregnant, and this violence resulted in a preterm delivery. And all the comments to this post were very, very supportive of the poster. And the goal for a lot of the comments seemed to be to find ways to empower the original poster to leave this marriage. Their comments also laid out ways in which the poster could become financially independent and leave. For this particular post, all the comments encouraged the woman who had posted to find ways to leave. In contrast, when there is a post made on this group that details emotional abuse, it seems to ignite a discussion in the comment section. So for example, this is paraphrased. None of the posts were actually copied or in any way directly quoted. Under this particular post, there was a great deal of argument about what mental and emotional abuse was, whether mental and emotional abuse was actually the same as physical abuse and caused equal damage. For this particular post, unlike the previous one, There were commenters recommending the original poster wait and see, and that with time and parenthood, things would improve. These were met with a great deal of disagreement from other members of the group. And the comment section of posts that detail this kind of abuse that is less obvious than physical abuse becomes a space for members to argue about what constitutes abuse that can be tolerated and where that line is between putting up with a certain type and intensity of abuse so as to exist within the society and the constraints, and what must absolutely not be tolerated regardless of societal pressure. And this is an ever-moving line based on the story or the post that's been made. Now, the second significant number of posts that were anonymous were dealt with intimate partner relationships and trying to understand what is normal and what is not with regards to physical intimacy. This is in a Pakistani context. This is particularly important because this is information that is not part of formal schooling. Sex education is not part of the schooling that happens in Pakistan. This is something that's considered very shameful and is not discussed by members of the family. Similarly, visits to gynecologists are reserved for serious health concerns. And so women have no frame of reference for their own sexuality or sexual health. Premarital sex and dating are taboo in Pakistan. So most women come to their marriages with little or no understanding of physical intimacy and sexual health. And this space becomes vital for them to be able to ask these questions without being the stigma of shame or judgment, right? Similarly, approximately 19% of the posts also revolved around abortions and the use of contraceptives. These are mostly concerned with the religious implications of abortions or the use of contraceptives. Now, one primary reason for these posts being made anonymous is the taboo and controversial nature of abortions and contraceptive use in Pakistan. In Pakistan, advertisement of contraceptives are labeled as indecent, immoral, anti-cultural, and anti-religion. This leaves this huge gap for most women regarding contraceptives, their use, how to obtain them, where to obtain them from, and how to use them. And this group provides this very safe space for them to ask these questions regarding their own sexual pleasures and intimate health, their reproductive health, without fear of harsh judgment or loss of respect or stigmatization. This group also consists of female doctors, and a lot of the times for these queries, the female doctors will take a lead in laying out, in answering these queries. Within the non-anonymous posts, most of the posts dealt with information seeking. A lot of them dealt with discussing the current political situation. At the time that this study took place, the Me Too movement was at the forefront and was making headlines, and there was a great deal of conversation in the group about what that meant for women in their context, what the Me Too movement, how they understood it as it applied to their lives. And so beyond just asking informative queries, this space has become an important area for engaging in conversations about women's own roles in society, the kind of constraints they face, and how best to navigate these constraints, right? So for example, there was this entire conversation that started from this particular post, and this is also paraphrased, where the poster was concerned about finding it incredibly demeaning that a woman's name from a nameplate hanging outside her home is removed, and that for invitation cards, for weddings, or for anything, it's always a man's name that's mentioned and never the woman's. Similarly, there have been conversations on the group around the Western idea of feminism and how that applies to them as Muslim women who live with certain constraints and societal expectations. There's been a great deal of conversation around gender roles and how these gender roles limit their possibilities, and if there are any ways for them to navigate these gender roles. So beyond just being a space for getting information about specific things or narrating their own personal experiences, this has become a space that allows women not just to express themselves without fear, but allows them to engage in meaningful conversations that help them understand their own rights, that help them navigate their own place within the society, and that help them sort of affiliate themselves or affiliate their ideas with specific forms of empowerment. Now, the reason why this space is as constructive as it is, and the reason why women are freely share very deeply traumatizing experiences is because of the way this space has been moderated, right? There are two moderators for this, both are women. They're moderating not just the posts themselves, but they're moderating the comments as well. Both of these women have young children, they don't work. They're averaging over like 1,000 posts per week. They're spending 4 to 5 hours every day going through the comments, going through the posts. They're making sure not just that the posts are are non-judgmental, but that the comments to specific posts that are made are non-judgmental. Every time a member makes a post that's judgmental or harsh, or that's targeted towards pulling down another woman, that member is either removed or they're warned based on what the comment was. The women also have a very strict, the moderators, they have a very strict criteria of allowing entry into this group. You can only become a part of this group if you are recommended by an existing member. Your profile must be at least a year old. And they go through every single profile that's recommended for adding to the group to make sure that the pictures that are shared on these profiles are real pictures of actual owners. So if you had pictures of flowers or if you had pictures of movie stars, that's a profile that would not get approved. And so a great deal of time and energy is spent in ensuring the sanctity of this space. We spoke to the moderator, and one of the things that she sort of mentioned is the emotional toll that this takes on the moderators themselves. Because as members of the group, we can choose to scroll past triggering posts, but the moderators are going through every single post, regardless of the kind of day they have or the mental space they're in. They go through all of these very dark posts. A lot of the women direct message the moderators in response to these posts to have conversations about the experiences they've had. So there's a great deal of emotional and mental toll that goes into maintaining a space like this from the moderators' end, and they're not getting paid for this. So this is mostly unpaid labor. So these spaces provide women with this non-judgmental, engaging environment where the rules of patriarchy that exist in their offline lives are suspended. Women are encouraged to be vulnerable safely. They know that the moderators will make sure that no harsh comments or judgment comes towards them. The moderators are very, very clear about making sure that no screenshots are taken of the posts that are made. So there was an incident during this time that we were working with the group where screenshots of a particular post were taken on a phone and they were shared, and the moderators found out, and they had a conversation with the person who had done this, and that person was removed. So there's a great deal of effort that goes into ensuring the sanctity of this space, which makes women feel very safe sharing really deeply traumatizing experiences and having these conversations. What we did not expect to find when we started working with this group was the vital role it plays in the process of empowering women from within. So, in our context, there is a systematic suppression of women's voices and immense family and societal pressure to not speak about the injustices that they face in their married lives and within society at large. Now, this closed women group plays like a really crucial role in the process of empowerment for literate women in Pakistan. And while an essential element of empowerment is the autonomy for decision-making, an equally essential component is the process that allows people to consider themselves able and worthy of that decision-making. And that's the pivotal role that this group plays. It encourages women, not only does it acknowledge their rights, but it helps them get to a point where they're able to exert their rights. Thank you, and I'm open for questions if I have time.
Thank you. You have run a little bit under time, so we definitely have time for a couple questions. If there's some questions, I'm looking at the participant lists of people want to use the raise hand mechanism. That will work.
I can't raise my hand, but can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Wow, thank you so much for this really important work. Can you talk a little bit about the background of these moderators? Because, I worry for them. This is a big task they've undertaken, something that, yeah, it's just emotionally trying.
Yeah, so both of them are young. They're in their early 30s. They both have families. They both have actually young children. They're both educated. They both have undergraduate degrees. And this is something that they've chosen to do. I mean, I would go so far as to say that this is a form of activism that they've chosen to take up, just because they realized there were no spaces for women to have these conversations, right? So when you get married, you're going into this physical relationship with no understanding of your sexuality or physical intimacy, and there's no space to have these conversations. One of them has actually personally also shared experiences of being sexually assaulted as a child. And she's done that openly with her own name. And so there is this, I think, an effort from their part to open up this space to have women talk about this and to be able to have these really hard conversations that we don't normally tend to have.
Mm. And the role of the doctors in the forum is also really interesting, because I wonder if they were recruited or they just happened upon it. And did you get a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so some of them were added by the original moderators. And then, so everybody who's part of the group has been added by somebody who was already part of the group. And so one of the really interesting things that the moderators do, and we haven't talked about this in the paper, is that they hold these sort of video sessions, these live Facebook sessions within the group, and they'll talk to, so they've had conversations with entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, to answer questions from other women who might want to set up home businesses. And they've had sessions with female doctors to talk about all of these issues, right? So if you had an issue, you could come to this live session and you could have a conversation about whatever it is that you wanted more information around, right? So, so women actually feel comfortable in this space asking the moderators to hold live sessions around specific themes and topics.
Fascinating.
So I'm going to take one more question from Nikki Dell, and then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Maryam, for the really inspiring work. Especially, I really appreciate the care that you've taken in engaging in this Facebook group and respecting their space and their privacy. Do you have a sense of the demographics of the group members a little bit? I know it must be hard from the group, but I guess 15,000 members. From what you're saying, it sounds like, you know, they're entrepreneurs, they're doctors. I guess, like, what segment of the population does this group represent?
Yeah, so we also encourage women to come and talk to us anonymously if they wanted to. We could just share a number that they could call on, but none of them did, and I can understand why. Most of the women in this group are educated. So within a Pakistani context, and I've been part of this, the study was over 6 months. I've been part of this group for a year. Anecdotally, I can tell you they're all educated, they're literate. So most of them have an undergrad degree. Most of them are married. Most of them have children. There was an incident a while ago where, because of the nature of the posts that are made, my instinct is that the moderators make an effort not to include unmarried or very young. So if you're 15 or 16 or 18, you wouldn't be allowed to be part of this group. There was one incident of, I think, a 17-year-old who became a member, and then through some posts or comments, it was found out that she was actually 17. And the moderator had a conversation with her about why it might not be appropriate for her to be in part of this space just because of the stories and the narratives that are shared. So they are all educated. A lot of them work. A lot of them work from home. So that's my sort of general instinct of the demographic for this group.
Great, thank you very much.